that everyone's out to be able to worship God today. We're missing, I counted in my head, about 8 people today, so we still have a very good crowd considering how many people are out. And we just appreciate so much you being here today to be able to worship God, especially when you think of all the illnesses and stuff going around, and just allergy season starting to set in. You can probably tell by my voice I have the Ohio Valley crud, as many people call it. So hopefully we continue to be able to be okay, and like Richard had announced, continue to remember those that aren't able to be here in prayer, and hopefully they'll be able to be back with us at the next appointed time. So thankful for all of our visitors we have here today. We want you to know you're an honored guest. We'd like for you to stick around. Let us get to know you after services, introduce ourselves, and we just want you to know we're so appreciative of you being here with us today. Appreciate all the men that have led us in worship. I told Brother Jeff when he walked in, I said, you're the most important man here today. If you're not here, we're in a whole lot of trouble. So we appreciate him stepping in. He did a great job so far this morning for Randy not being here with us. We're in the middle of our series on the Ten Commandments, where we'll be going through and discussing each individual commandment and talking about the significance that it has in our lives. Oftentimes when we discuss the Ten Commandments, we go through and we read different ones and we say, well, that one really doesn't necessarily apply to me. And one of the ones today that we're going to be discussing is one that you may look at and say, I've never done that before, I probably never will do that, so therefore that doesn't really have any significance or meaning to me. Today we're discussing the commandment of stealing. And we're going to talk about today why God tells us don't steal. Now when we think of stealing, we think of maybe going into a store or maybe breaking into someone's house and taking that person or that business's possessions. But if we're not careful, we very easily can steal from God Himself. And we can also steal from each other in ways that are not necessarily physical things. You know, God told Moses to let the people of Israel know in Exodus 20, verse 15, you shall not steal. As we said, these commandments are not meant to ruin our fun on this earth. But all these commandments are meant to protect us so that we do not alter our fellowship with God. You know, and you might ask the question, you know, why shouldn't we steal? And to me, this is one of those universal commandments that even people that aren't Christians know you shouldn't steal. And it's something that pretty much anyone, no matter their religious background, they can agree that this commandment is one that should be followed. But what I want to talk about today is how this commandment does seep into our cultural standards as well. Some messages we may preach, we may say, oh, this is what the Scriptures teach, and maybe we are isolated in that belief. But this is a commandment that is viewed wrong all throughout our land today. See, stealing, number one, is a violation of the law. It is wrong in our laws in this country to steal. And if you want to go even further, in other parts of the world, you lose your hand if you steal. There's punishment for stealing. If you steal, some countries, you may lose your hand. But the reason that we are commanded to not steal is because we are, first off, we are commanded to work. That's the way we gain things. Yet, many people in our culture, and sometimes even Christians themselves, they make living off of taking from others. Well, how do we gain? Well, there's only really 2 areas that God authorizes us to gain for ourselves. The first one is as a reward for work. That's how we gain. We work for what we have. And stealing is the exact opposite of working. Stealing is taking from someone else what they have worked hard for and making it your own. But notice what Paul would say in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. He would say, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Now, there are some cases where you are unable to work. There are some situations where work may not be required for someone else. But the thing is, and this is something that probably bothers all of us, Nothing bothers me more than when someone works hard for something and someone else takes it. And Paul goes a step further here than what many other people would say. They would say, well, you need to get a job or you need to work. Paul says, if you will not work, you won't eat. Eating is a necessity for us to live. Paul says the same way, work is a necessity. And the thing is, this just isn't talking about physical work. Our work as a Christian is also important in this. How will we eat of spiritual blessings? How will we inherit that home in heaven if we will not work? And Paul goes a step further. You were commanded. This is something that's a commandment. That's how we earn income, not taking from other people. And then also you can receive a gift from someone else. That's another way we receive things. It's a whole lot different when someone gives you a gift instead of you taking something that's not rightfully yours. You know, Jesus would talk about this principle in Luke 12 and verse 33. He would say, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. Jesus talks about giving to the needy, people that are truly in need. You hear the story of Robin Hood, where he took from the rich and gave to the poor. That's still stealing. He still stole from the rich to give to the poor. And what many people want to do is they want to take from the rich and give to the poor when they themselves have opportunity to give themselves. And that's the thing. When we steal or we take from someone else what is not rightfully ours, we step in the position of God. God has blessed each and every one of us with what we have. And it is not our job to step in the place of God. So we can earn money, we can gain things, possessions, things that all of us have worked for. But there's also a corrupt mean of getting gain. There's a corrupt way of doing this. Isn't it amazing? God allowed man to work. And we think of work being a part of the curse when man sinned. No, man had a purpose before he sinned. Man had work to do before he sinned. We have this beautiful thing of us being able to labor and to provide for ourselves and our families. And what have we done? We want to take a shortcut. We want to take from someone else. Paul would write in the book of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 28, he would say, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Let him who stole steal no longer, Paul says. It's amazing when you think of these passages. We will contribute these things to people that aren't Christians. But who was Paul writing to? He wasn't writing to non-Christians. He was writing to Christians. Let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him labor. We remove our God-given roles on this earth when we steal. Once again, we step in the place of God in giving and taking amongst ourselves. God has condemned this practice of stealing. And the thing is, it'll land you in jail sometimes too in our land. Our laws are flawed in a lot of ways, but our laws do say you shouldn't steal. And there should be prosecution behind stealing. But the thing is, ultimately, God's law disagrees with stealing. And number two, stealing is a violation of loyalty. I mean, think about that for just a second. We talked about this a few weeks ago in our Wednesday night class about how you feel when someone steals from you. And let's just say for a moment that the person that stole from you is someone that you know. Maybe it's someone that you trust, someone that you have a relationship with, and that stealing, what that does is that violates that loyalty, that friendship. Maybe it's a family member. But ultimately, this loyalty, this violation, is typically seen not in the home, but more so in the workplace. When you think for just a moment, as an employee, when you are given the opportunity to handle money, when you're given the opportunity to handle things, possessions, you are being trusted to do the right thing. 24, look what he says. Bondservants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in sincerity of heart, fearing God. And whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord God. I'm a curious person, so I wondered and asked, Google to look this up for me. How often do employees steal from companies? You've probably heard of stories. I've even heard of preachers embezzling money from churches. And according to U.S. Today, somewhere in the neighborhood of $128 billion is stolen from companies every year. $128 billion. According to U.S. Today, 48% of all American workers took something from an employer last year. Half took something from an employer that was not theirs. People do this by taking things home, selling things without their employer's knowledge, pocketing money and taking kickbacks, falsifying time records, and wasting time while at work. I understand working a secular job at times throughout my life. There were periods of time where I did not like the people I worked for. I did not like what I did. But it's important to note verse 23. Whatever you do, do it heartily, as to the Lord and not to men. Before we are whatever our profession is, we are a Christian. And our honesty should be at our jobs. Our honesty should be at home. Our honesty should be everywhere we go, because before we are whatever our occupation is, we are a child of God. Because verse 24 says, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance, for you serve the Lord Christ. We serve God in all that we do. I don't care how bad your boss is. I don't care how annoying the people are that you work with. You still work for God. And as we talked about in our class this morning, God just doesn't watch what we do in here. God watches us when we go to work. God watches us how we interact at home. God watches us all the time and sees what we do. And think, if we fall into that 48% of American workers who took something from their employer without their knowledge, that information comes to light, people know that you're a Christian, what kind of message does that send? We're no longer serving the Lord God. It's almost like we're serving ourselves. And that's what stealing is. It's a service of self. But not only do employees have a responsibility, an employer also has a responsibility to the people that they work with. Think of this. Colossians 4 verse 1, Masters, give your bondservants what is just and fair, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. I'll tell you right now, there are a lot of people that do not treat their employees right. And I'm aware of that. And you're aware of that, right? I mean, we see it all the time. And if you talk to people that work in different industries, they'll tell you they're not treated fairly. And at times, they're treated badly. They're underpaid, they're overworked, they're treated badly, and in a way, that's a form of stealing too. When you rip someone off or take advantage of someone else, that's just not the employee. The employer can do the same thing. And the thing is, we talked about over in the book of Amos, how God viewed when people took advantage of people less fortunate, or took and manipulated people that really couldn't fight back. See, I'm of the opinion that less theft among employers, there's usually less theft among the employees. If everyone's treating everyone fairly, everybody's getting what they need, then guess what? There's probably going to be a whole lot less stealing. That's not always the case. People may steal anyway just because they like doing it, or they get some kind of thrill or enjoyment out of it. But the thing is, when you think about this is really a problem with ethics. The ethics of the individual is brought into question. Ethics are a term that we typically don't like talking about. It's usually that HR handbook you're handed, or if you have to take some kind of courses on your job where you have to read all this stuff that you're like, whatever, this doesn't have anything to do with me. But really, ethics is defined with one word that transcends into Christianity, and that's integrity. Integrity is what you do when no one else is watching. It's one way to give lip service. It's one way to just act a certain way or talk a certain way. But what do you really do when no one's paying attention to you? You know, Psalm 25 and verse 21, look what the psalmist says. May integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. Stealing can come across in various different ways that bring up ethical questions in life. Don't hit me, but tax season's next month. I don't like paying taxes. You probably don't like paying taxes either, but it's an ethical thing. Do we pay our taxes the way we're supposed to? Think about this. Keeping our word, that's an ethical thing. When you say something, do you really mean it? Are you actually going to follow through with it? That's an ethical thing. Borrowing things and returning them, when you borrow something, do you really give it back, or are you just going to borrow it to keep it? Really, integrity and ethics come down to when we're obligated to do something, that we actually do it. And that obligation extends to even our fellowship with God. Do we truly keep our word? God, I'm going to give you my life. I'm going to do everything you tell me to do. I'm going to do the best I can to follow the footsteps of Jesus every day. That's a promise. And that's the thing. We think of ethics being this thing at work. But ethics is really what Christianity is all about. It's keeping your word. No one is more ethical than God. God keeps his word all the time. God is the same every single day. Because if we rob Caesar, we're technically robbing God. Jesus was asked the question, do we give to Caesar? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. Jesus saw the importance of this. Jesus understood this. And the thing is, people will know us by our ethics too. If you do everything right, people take note of that. When you're the same all the time, when you are consistent with your integrity, people take note of that. Now, I find it refreshing that the psalmist says, may integrity and uprightness preserve me. I want to do the right thing while I wait on you, while I wait for you, God. That's really the mission statement of a Christian. Integrity and uprightness. That's the way we're supposed to be in all that we do. But the thing is, you may be saying, okay, I pay my taxes, I keep my word, I do everything that I'm supposed to do. This sermon has absolutely nothing to do with me. And I've done that before. Even preparing lessons, you're like, okay, this doesn't really have much to do with me. But I think that's because we think of stealing, we think of one definition. That's what it is. You're taking possession from someone else, we're done. But stealing also has a bigger issue. Stealing ultimately, and this is where we're going to focus for the rest of the lesson, stealing ultimately is a violation of a heavenly love. Ask yourself this question. Who has given you everything you have? God. God's given us everything we have. Earlier this morning, and I hate talking about this topic because I think a lot of people get uncomfortable talking about it. Earlier this morning, after we took the Lord's Supper, we had the opportunity to give. And people always think the preacher preaches on giving when he wants more money, and that's not the case here at all. We don't just do that because we've always done it. And Bobby did a great job with bringing our minds to the real purpose of why we give. But giving ultimately is a way of us appreciating God. A small appreciation for everything God's done for us. And I don't know if there's necessarily a dollar amount that you can put down that truly shows your appreciation to God. But here's what a lot of people do. They will give to their sports teams. They will give to their hobbies. They will give to this. They will give to that. And then it's time to give. I throw my leftovers in the plate. See, God loves us enough to give us everything that we have, but sometimes we steal from God in the way we give. Now I want you to think about that just for a second. We sometimes steal from God in the way that we give. Now there's a passage I want to look at, and let's not get confused and think I'm saying we should tithe, because there's no New Testament commandment that talks about tithing. We are told to give as we prosper. We are told to give from the heart. But the Israelites over in Malachi chapter 3, they weren't doing that. They weren't giving the way they should. And we get this insight from God's mind himself about the way he views when people steal from him and the way that they give. Look at this. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings? You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me. Even this whole nation, bring all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing, that there will not be room enough to receive it. God starts out this monologue here. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me, God says. God doesn't care about the dollar amount. He cares about the heart, and he cares about the mind when it's given. Because if you are just begrudgingly giving God whatever you think you're going to give, I don't really want to give this, but everybody's going to look at me weird if I don't give something, that's not giving with the right heart. And you can give thousands of dollars each week, but if it's not with the right intent, not in the right purpose, God doesn't want that $1,000 either. Because here's what God wants. God willingly gives us everything. He freely gives us everything. He lovingly gives us everything. And when we give back, do we give it willingly? You got one hand in the plate, one hand coming back, or is it here? But the thing is, when people think of giving, and this is something I don't understand why we do this, when we talk about giving, immediately we go to money. That's the first thing we think of, money. That's what we're going to talk about when we talk about giving. But God gives us something much more valuable than money. Sometimes we not only steal when we give back to God monetarily, but we steal from God when it comes back to time. Time is much more valuable than money. And I'm sure the older as we get, we see how much more valuable time is than money. We think of all the time that we spend with each other, all the time that we have to be with one another. And when you think about Ephesians 5 and verse 16, it says, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. You and I are given an amount of time on this earth that we do not know. And we don't know when that time is going to end. But if you live this week, 7 days, 24 hours, and all we give God is 2 hours today and 1 hour Wednesday, we are robbing God of our time. Now, I'm not saying you go and be like a monk in a monastery where you just shut yourself off from the rest of the world and all you do is just sit in a corner and just think about God. That's not what I'm saying. But if God gives me 24 hours, and some days we don't even give him a minute, is that not robbery of God? Because God doesn't have to give me 24 hours. God doesn't have to give me another day of life. God doesn't have to bless me with this time, but he chooses to. And God chooses to do what's best for us in our time, giving us our time that we have here. But can I ask you, what do you do with your time? Because you may say, well, I don't have a lot of money, but we all have the same amount of time. All of us get 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour. We all have that time. And at times, Jesus didn't have money. People that followed Jesus, they didn't have money. But they had time. But not only time, and I think that's one of the biggest ones we steal from God in the way we use time for ourselves. But at the same time, God's blessed us with talents too, abilities. When we think of talents, we think of like the ability to sing, or the ability to be a public speaker, or the ability to maybe shoot a basketball, or swing a bat, or throw a football. That's when we think of talents and abilities, those are the things that we think of. That person is gifted. And you watch the tournament going on right now. Watching some of the games, it's like, wow, that guy can really shoot a ball. He can really dribble really fast. He's really quick, and he's got a lot of stamina. This person has a lot of ability, a lot of talents. But the thing is, God views talent differently than we do. God doesn't view us of how good of singers we are. He views us whether we sing or we don't. God doesn't view how eloquent we are when we speak, but whether we speak the truth or we don't. And the thing is, God has given us all the ability to serve Him and the talents necessary to get His message across to other people. Yet we do exactly like Moses did and said, I can't speak. I can't talk. They won't listen to me. Nobody will listen to me. And we rob God of our abilities. You know, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 15 through 17, Paul says, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where would be the smelling? It's interesting when you study the human body and you understand how, like, my hand and my foot really don't have much in common other than they work together for my body. You know, many of us may have the ability to do something that's better than someone else's ability to do it, yet we still want other people to do it instead of us. If God blessed you with the ability to speak, don't say, I can't speak to somebody about Him. Because it's interesting, you know, I can't tell people about Christ, but I can tell them anything they want to know about the game last night. I can't tell anybody, I can't invite anybody to church, but I can invite them to a cookout at my house. I can't convey that way. What are we doing? We're robbing God of the abilities that God has blessed us with. And He didn't have to. There are many people in our world that don't have the ability to speak. But you do. Some people are just better listeners than other people are. You know, you might not be the best public speaker, but sometimes people don't need a monologue about their life. They just need you to listen. And you see, that's sometimes what we do. We don't think of robbing God that way. Oh, you're just talking about money in the plate. No. Sometimes our robbery of God is far worse than money in the plate. I can't do this, but God says you can. God gave you the ability to. You know, I don't have enough time for God, but we do. We have enough time for other things. That's what somebody once told me. If you're too busy for God, you're too busy. If you're too busy for God, you're too busy. You know, the scriptures are clear that we all have a part. We all have a part. I mean, look what it says. Because I am not a hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? The hand's a part of the body. The ear's a part of the body. We all have different functions at times. Some are better at teaching. Some are better at singing. Some are better at, speaking. But the one thing we all can do is we can all encourage, and that's a talent in and of itself. It's interesting, Barnabas, Rusty said he was talking about Barnabas in his Acts class. Barnabas isn't noted for being a great public speaker. Barnabas was noted. His name was changed from Joseph to Barnabas because of how good of an encourager he was. God had blessed him with that ability to encourage, and that's what he did. He went around and encouraged everybody he could. That's using God's gifts for us for His purpose. And see, here's the thing. Today we might not think of stealing this way. We may not think of taking something for ourselves this way. But I want to put this thought of stealing from giving, stealing of time, and stealing of talents with this phrase to close out. And I really want us to meditate on this phrase. There is a debt all of us owe that we can never repay. I want us to really think about that. There is a debt that all of us owe that we can never repay. Our sin separated us from God. There was nothing or no one other than God's Son who could pay that debt. And God didn't say, well, I don't want to give my son. God didn't say, well, I want to hold him back from mankind. God said, here he is. And Jesus, think about this. Jesus didn't have many physical blessings. He didn't have a lavish life, but he still gave to his Father everything he had. Jesus gave his time to other people, but ultimately for his Father's purpose. And Jesus did not withhold himself from everyone else. Jesus is what we would call a man of the people. Jesus would go to the tax collectors and notorious sinners. He would heal people that no one else wanted anything to do with. He would speak to people that the Pharisees viewed as outcasts. Why? Because Jesus made the most of his time. He made the most of his ability. Here's the thing. If someone paid off a physical debt for you that you could never repay, how would you react to that person? What would you do? Can I take you out to dinner? I'm always going to be in your debt. Anything you need from me, I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to go above and beyond for you. It makes us feel warm. It may even make us feel emotional. But here's the thing. Christ paid a debt that no one else could pay. And he paid that debt for us when we didn't deserve it. You know, the scriptures say that Christ came and died not for great people, not for people who had their act together, but he came and he died for sinners. And when we hear phrases like this, we get a little weirded out. Uh-oh, we're going down that grace-only path. No, no, no. This statement is still true. There is nothing you can ever do to repay it. But gratitude means I'll do everything I can to show how much I appreciate it. Christ didn't withhold himself from the cross. So why should I withhold myself from serving him? God didn't withhold his giving of his Son to this world, so why should I withhold myself from giving to God? Christ didn't withhold his love from people who didn't deserve it, so why should I withhold my love from people who at times don't deserve it? See, here's the thing. If I'm always comparing myself to Jesus, I've always got room to grow. There's always things I can do better. But at times, what do? We compare ourselves to the worst person we know. Well, they don't give any time to God. At least I give 5 minutes. They don't give anything in the plate at church. At least I give what I want to give. At least, But Jesus gave everything. God gave everything. It's not like he had 10 other sons to give. He had one. He's only begotten. The same thing God required from Abraham with his son Isaac, God himself was willing to do for everyone. A God that gave that way, what kind of giving does God expect from me? Not stealing from God, but giving him everything we have. And to me, that's the challenging part of this lesson. It's not challenging for me to not steal from someone else. I know that's not the right thing to do. But the challenging thing is not only to look at us individually or collectively or with relationships with each other, but ultimately to ask ourselves the question, am I stealing from God today? Am I stealing from God, or am I giving God everything I have? And that takes vulnerability. That takes opening yourself up. That's not easy to give somebody everything you have. But here's the thing. If you give God everything you have, you're a better spouse. You give God everything you have, you're a better parent. You give God everything you have, you're a better child. You give God everything you have, you're a better employee. You give God everything you have, you're a better employer. We could go down the list. If you give God everything you have, all of it, you turn turn it over to Him, you're better every other place. So today, are we withholding from God? Do we withhold our lives from God? Do we withhold our hearts from God? But most importantly, do we withhold our soul from God? God is the one that's given us all these things. All He asks in return is that we serve Him with it. Maybe today you're not doing that. Maybe you're not a child of God today. And because of what Christ has done for you, you want to give God all that you have. And that's the greatest decision you'll ever make. You come to the knowledge of the gospel by believing that Jesus is the Son of God, repenting of your sins, confessing your faith publicly by being baptized for the forgiveness of those sins. When you take those steps, you come up out of that watery grave born again. You have a new purpose, you have a new life, and you have a new responsibility to serve God with all that you have. Maybe today we've taken those steps and we're not doing the things that we ought to do. And I'm here to tell you, I don't believe anyone completely serves God 100% of the time. I don't believe that anyone fully immerses themselves to serve God all the time. So if you feel like you're not, don't worry. Everyone else is in the same boat. That's why God gave us the church, for us to encourage each other. If you're struggling, we'll pray for you. We'll be there in any way that we possibly can this morning because we want everyone to leave here in the right fellowship with God. So if we can pray for you, if we can help you in any way this morning, would you come forward now together as we stand and sing?